just got the amazing jacket copy. So
Yes,
instead,
fantastic.
Where did the initial idea for I Am Made of Death come from, and how long did it take from that first idea to this beautiful final product?
I wrote this as sort of a continuation to my first two books, which I had initially wanted to write a series of interconnected standalones where they all centered around the premise that all of the worlds are pressed up against one another like paper, and certain people who have had brushes with death have gained the ability to step through holes in the sky and go to these different alternate planes. But obviously, with magic comes a price, and so I was like, what is the price of being able to do that? And I wanted them to risk bringing a passenger home with them if they went to the sky. And so when I was writing I Am Made of Death, I wanted to explore, a main character who brought something insidious home, and to play with the idea of language deprivation and the horrors of language deprivation, because I grew up profoundly deaf without a lot of access to sound and community, and it was a very formative experience for me growing up, and I carried a lot of anger with it, and I wanted to explore anger over that through a horror lens. And so I wanted to make this girl who is Vivian is this very together person on the outside. She's very hyper feminine, she's very buttoned up, she's very on top of things and neat and polished, and on the inside, when she looks in the mirror, she sees this monster, and this monster is her anger. And I really wanted to sort of explore what that would look like and how it would all come apart and unravel when I started to pull at it a little bit.
I really love that. I loved Vivian so much. I loved both of these main characters, but she really has my heart. I love a feral girl, especially a feral girl with really good reason to be feral. And I really loved, obviously my questions about Vivian are supposed to be further along, but we're just deviating. I was obsessed with she has a deceptively privileged life, right? And then this just terrible secret, which is that her voice is poison and it kills people. But also, the way that she deals with that is not by for lack of a better word, shutting up and being demure. It's by acting out, behaving destructively, self-sabotaging, and it completely destroys the narrative of the perfect victim that we're taught to sympathize with. I found her deeply sympathetic, but she was messy, and I loved that. I felt like it was almost more sympathetic in a way. It seems like that was a deliberate choice as well?
Yeah, my first idea of Vivian acting as this sort of spoiled self-sheltered, oh my goodness, socialite who is fighting back in these kind of quiet ways and pushing the line in ways that, little by little, she gets her agency back in these kind of subtle and increasingly violent ways over the course of the story. I don't know if you remember the Mary-Kate and Ashley movie that is It Takes Two.
Yes.
One of the twins, when she didn't get her way, would just pass out in the middle of the floor, and everyone would be like, oh no. And I don't know, I was just thinking of that when I was writing it, and I was like, I want her to feel like that. Obviously, she's behaving in a way that is misbehaving or bratty, but she's a child, and her needs weren't being met. And so she wasn't doing those things, in this Mary-Kate and Ashley movie. She wasn't passing out laying on the floor because she was a horrible person. She was doing it because she was a child who wasn't being taken care of appropriately, and her needs weren't being met, her emotional needs. And I wanted to sort of take that, which sounds kind of weird that I took inspiration from a Mary-Kate and Ashley movie for a horror, but it did work, and to inform her character. I wanted, her to behave in these ways that are horrible and ugly and not necessarily the way she's supposed to behave, but then you realize that it's because she's robbed of her voice and has no other way to explain that she needs something that she's not getting.
Yeah, I thought that was so effective. And I loved what you said when you were well, she's a child. I think that gets lost sometimes in YA fiction because a lot of YA readers are adults, and I'm an adult who reads a ton of YA. I love it, but these are children. They're not going to react in a way that a 30-year-old would to
right.
They're 15, 16, 17. They are literally dealing with big things for the first time. It's normal, healthy even, to have a strong reaction to a situation you can't control.
Right.
But I feel like the other main character, Thomas Walsh, or can I call him Tommy? Is that
yes,
okay?
Absolutely.
Tommy in my head. He has almost an opposite thing where he's been forced to grow up a little bit too fast to take on responsibility for the people in his life, especially his mother, and so as a result, he is almost like holding so much, and he feels like he has to keep himself locked down. It's a really interesting contrast to Vivian.
Yeah.
So where did he come from?
Well, for him, weirdly enough, I say all this book was born out of anger, and this one, his character was as well, because I know I am a deaf mother to 2 hearing children, and I didn't realize when I had kids that I would be met with so much surprise at, oh, you know, you're doing that, you're handling that. Is that hard for you? And like, no, it doesn't impact my parenting at all. And you know, I had people who would ask me, are you worried about their language development? Are you worried about, you know, this? Are you worried about that? And no. And so I've written, this is my 3rd book in the horror series, and in all of them, the relationship with parents is tenuous. A lot of times, the main characters find that they have a frayed relationship with the adults in their lives who they trust and expect to guide them correctly, and then that at the end turns out to be, you know, the least reliable relationship in their lives for whatever reason. You know, there's a lot of unpacking generational trauma. And in Thomas's case, I wanted to show a strong relationship with his mother. His mother taught him how to hold space for other people, how to meet people where they are, how to you know, be there for someone who needs you. And you know, he has so much love to give because his mother gave him so much love. And it was important for me to showcase a very strong familial bond for Thomas. I think he's probably one of the most well-adjusted characters I've written because of that. And so that too came from just sort of, I had a point I wanted to make, and I made it with him.
I think you really did. I was really struck by his relationship with his mother. It moved me a lot. I also write about a lot of bad parenting in my books, and so the good ones really stand out. Yeah, and I also felt like it prepared him well for his very stressful work environment.
Yes.
Maybe now is a good time to talk about, so we've talked a lot about like the horror elements, but there's also a romance, and I guess they call it a horror-mance.
Yeah.
It's both. This book is a true horror-mance. It is, I would say, like truly both of them. I wouldn't say it's 50-50, I'd say it's 100% both all the time. Yeah. But they seem like really different genres, like from a more macro perspective. But when I was reading this book, I was struck by the fact that they really don't feel that different when you dig in more closely. So how did you go about taking like tropes and ideas from both of these seemingly different genres and melding them together?
Well, I think I like that question because I think that there is nothing more horrifying than falling in love for the first time, especially when you're a teenager, you know, and it's awkward and it's horrifying.
That's so funny because I always say I think every YA book is a horror book because adolescence is horrifying.
Yes, it is. It is horrifying, and like some of even now that I'm an adult, I realize it wasn't that big of a deal. Some of my greatest hits at 2 a.m. are things that I said that were so cringeworthy to crushes when I was in 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, and up. I'm like, why am I still replaying this all these years later? Because it was such a formative, scary, experience, putting yourself out there, opening.
Oh, for sure. The behind-the-scenes drama at my senior year of high school musical will never leave me.
Yeah, you carry
That's some deathbed stuff right there.
Right, you carry it with you, and it is so there's such like a bedrock of who you become and like how you grow up. And I think that it's so fun to explore falling in love through a horror lens because they have the same immediacy, the same tactile feelings. What's the difference between the butterflies in your stomach expectation of seeing someone you're falling in love with and the creeping expectation that maybe something scary is right over your shoulder. They're both such tactile, palpable feelings, and playing with them just sort of there was a nice marriage of it in writing, I think.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like, why is your heart beating so fast? Is
Yeah.
it the demon in the mirror, or is it the cute boy that you're kind of worried is going to die because he's working for your dad?
Right, exactly. You're in fight or flight in both situations.
Okay, hang on. I also really wanted to talk about the tropes. I love tropes. I am the #1 trope fan, and there are some real good ones in this book, including the bodyguard romance, which I love a bodyguard romance, and this is a really good one. So I would also love to hear you talk more about that and other favorite tropes that you wove in, or maybe some tropes you'd like to explore in the future.
I'm glad you're bringing up tropes because I have a list of tropes from your books that I want to talk about here.
Yeah, you came prepared.
I came prepared. hard. It's my favorite topic. But no, I do, in terms of the bodyguard romance aspect, I love a bodyguard romance as a reader, as a viewer. And I wanted, separate from that, I really loved the movie How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days.
Oh, great movie.
Right, and that scene where she's walking away and she's like, I'm gonna make you like hate your life. And he's like, you're already falling in love with me. And that juxtaposition when you realize they're not on the same page is so delicious. And I wanted to sort of play with that. They're at odds from, Thomas and Vivian are at odds from page one. And it allowed for some really fun tension. In terms of tropes, I love playing with, horror as a trope, and I love playing with setting and, using the setting to drive the story. And I did want to talk to you about that because you do the same thing, I think.
I know.
I know, in The Devouring Gray, everything's so, cold and like sort of devoid of color and warmth, and it really propels the story along. And I'm just so curious as someone, because I know I like to use the setting to propel the story and to act like almost as a standalone character. And your settings are both so different because in All of Us Villains, it's rich and lush and like it's just so much more. It feels more colorful and more. I don't know. Lush is the word I would use for it. And I'm just wondering how you use setting as a vehicle for writing your stories.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. To me, my settings are characters. I love I don't think this is a real thing, but I call it, all my books have like micro settings. Actually, not all of them. My next one doesn't have it. Well, no, it kind of does.
Interesting.
But it's the idea where like a story takes place in like one town or like on like one, in one setting that feels in and of itself like a character. And so you get to really sink into like all the texture, the feeling of it. And all my books also have like a really strong color to me as well.
Okay.
And that like informs like literally everything I do. Like all the every single like line I write in it feels like it's like marinated in that first.
Okay.
It's really like just one of my big process things. And so for The Devouring Gray, my debut duology, which is about like teenagers making bad decisions in the upstate New York woods, like because like that story is like a big grief story for the main character Violet, I felt like when you're like that unwell and you've had that big of a loss, there's no color in the world at all. Like it was just all gone. And so I felt like over the course of the duology, she slowly started to get it back. But it was just really effective. Like of course it was all gone. And then for Villains, that book is very red to me.
For sure.
And the colors are like sharp and bright because they feel like almost deadly. Like like how some animals will like present as really brightly colored because they're like, I'm poisonous, don't touch me, except in Villains. Like what if I did though?
Oh, I love that.
Yes. So yeah, it was very intentional. And I felt like, so to fling this back at you, I felt like I Am Made of Death also had like a really strong sense of place and setting. Like your mood and tone were so sharp and vivid. I felt like I could see everything. I could see all of Vivian's outfits. I could see her room. I could see like her like coming downstairs in her oversized sweatshirt to like fall asleep on the couch and watch a documentary. I felt like I was so in it. So how do you like craft that sense of place?
I wanted to make, like you said, the setting as a character. And for me, it actually is interesting you asked that because I had a much harder time making the setting feel alive when I was writing this than I did the previous book, Your Blood, My Bones. It's set at this decrepit, like decaying farmhouse by the woods. And it was easy to sort of like bring it to life because there was so much going on. There's these plants dying, there's this blooming garden, the things are coming, like plants growing down the chimney, things that shouldn't, moss growing on things where there shouldn't be moss, mushrooms growing where there shouldn't be mushrooms. And it was easy to sort of evoke this feeling of decay through that sort of lush description.
Yeah, good props.
Yeah.
It's like how a good kissing scene needs good props too, like a chair
Right,
or like
yes.
the theater kid's really coming out.
Right, exactly. It was props. I was able to set the stage. But with this, I was trying to write this cold, devoid of life McMansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, that, the whole reason Vivian resents it is because she feels like it doesn't have any character. There's no pictures of the family. In fact, when she goes to Thomas's house, what strikes her is like his mom has a plate with his handprints on it from when he was 4. His mom has pictures, like crayon drawings of him and his sister on the wall. And that's so foreign to her. Like her house has nothing to, like she could move out tomorrow and there's no trace that she was there at all. And it was so hard at first when I was writing to really make it feel like a living, breathing location.
But to me, it's like the lack of living and breathing is what makes it feels like Vivian. It's all like constrained in there, it's all coiled tight, and so it really let like her breathe.
Yeah.
She becomes almost like the metaphor becomes her, she becomes the setting.
Yes, I'm glad that worked. I'm glad I came through. That was the goal, right? You never know. And it definitely took a lot of fine tuning it. And I knew what I was going for, and I would, it took a couple of rewrites to really get it to feel the way, it looked in my head and on my Pinterest boards,
That's always the struggle. I feel like a first draft to me is me being like, have you seen the meme that's like the picture of the horse that looks really good at first, and then as you keep drawing it, it gets like worse and worse?
Yes.
That's me, except the whole thing is the back end of the horse.
Right. It's like the idea in your head is just this beautiful piece of art, and then you get it out, and it just falls flat at the first time. You really have to kind of keep revising to get it to.
This is like not even in my questions, but I guess process question time. Are you like more of a planner or a pantser? Like how, I feel like that's really not a fair, those aren't the only two ways, but like if they're axes, like where do you fall on them?
This upsets people when I say it, I don't know why, but I write the last chapter first, and I draft to that.
No, that makes so much sense. I really don't. I've never met anyone else who's like this before. I don't write the last chapter first, but I'm a really ending focused writer, and I can't get a book right until I have the climax correct in my head. I'll get like an image, and that's what I write to the entire time. Yes. And I'll like write down the whole image, and that's where it like all comes together. This is so interesting.
It is.
I hate first chapters. Everyone else I know, including my co-author, is like, I love first chapters. There's this magical moment. I'm like, I rewrote the first chapter 20 times.
Yes.
Like literally, that's not an exaggeration.
It's the end. Well, I feel like for me, it's like driving to a destination. You don't just get in the car and go.
You
know
need
where
the
you're
GPS.
going.
You need the coordinates.
Yes, you know where you're getting to. You know where you're trying to. Even if you don't know what roads you're going to take. And I think that I think it's called sequel sequencing is the technical term, but I like to outline at least 2 chapters ahead, and that's my headlights. I can see in the dark a little bit ahead, but I can't see all the way to the destination. That's all a mystery. That's between like me and future Kelly to figure out. I just
literally a tomorrow problem.
Yeah, right, exactly.
That's so interesting. I feel like endings are just so, also to me endings are like where you stick the landings. You have to know that it's going to work. Like there's nothing more disappointing to me than something that falls apart right when I feel like it should be coming together. So I'm like, I never want to do that to a reader. That's like my worst fear.
Exactly, and it's nice to know you're building to something.
Yeah. Okay, well this was all really interesting, and I'm now even more interested to hear you talk about, well, we already talked about mood and tone, but I kind of want you to talk about it more, but maybe we can do that later. But I also wanted to talk about specifically Vivian and Tommy's romance, and the way that also felt like its own character. Like they're so different that it felt like its own whole arc on top of their individual character arcs. Do you plot romance? Do you like feel out romance? How much do you bind it into a character arc when you're thinking about how to put 2 characters together?
I am also a very trope-based writer.
Yes.
And so a lot of times when I'm starting, I'll have a list of tropes that I'm really fascinated with, that I think would be fun to play with, and then I'll write up to those, build the tension up to the trope. And then in all of these little vignettes that are maybe not necessarily part of the story, and then some of them make it in, some of them don't. It's a lot of writing and rewriting and putting puzzle pieces together, but I guess I go in knowing the character's motives, not really knowing the romance, just knowing that I want them to be in this situation together. How do I get there? I want to, whatever the trope may be, if it's only one bed, I know I don't have that in this one, but that's like a favorite trope. Like if I do that, how are you going to get them to that moment? Like what sort of choices need to be made in the narrative to drive them to that?
Kind of reminds me of your endings thing.
Yeah.
Which again makes sense, because I feel like a thing I think about a lot during revisions is like you can't hit a target you can't see. If you don't even know what you're trying to make, then you've lost your way and you need to reassess. Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, let's see. You talked about this at the beginning, but I want you to talk about it again. So you've called this novel like a kind of a companion novel to your first 2 releases, or like an interconnected standalone. Obviously it centers different characters, but there are some cameos, there are some fun Easter eggs, there are some things knitting together from your previous releases, The Whispering Dark and My Blood, Your Bones. So you said it was always your plan to write a few interconnected standalones, but I'd love to hear more about what that was like, because I feel like that's kind of the dream. Sequels are really hard.
Yes.
Interconnected standalone seems from my blissful ignorance, really easy in comparison. Not easy, just easier than a sequel.
It was easy in the sense that I had a vision. I knew the stories I wanted to write. It was not easy in the sense that nobody else shared my vision. I was a new author. Nobody knew who I was. I was figuring it out, and I said to my agent, like, I think I can do this. And he was like, let's start with one. Let's see where this goes. And so then I sold Your Blood, My Bones on proposal, sort of already having, I Am Made of Death and the characters churning in the background. Just sort of, when I handed in Your Blood, My Bones, I knew it was going to have spillover characters from The Whispering Dark, but I didn't tell anyone because I decided it's better to just, do it and ask for forgiveness.
Yeah, forgiveness, not permission. Sometimes neither.
Right. And I was waiting for my editor to hand it back to me and be like, this is not what we thought it was going to be, or what are they doing here? The crossover characters, or leave them out. They never said anything. So we did it again a third time. and I never was told, you can't do this. So here we are, and they're connected. And they're separate enough that if they had said, give me the axe, I could have finagled it, but I really had a vision, and I snuck it in there, so.
And this one in particular, it felt really actually important in ways that I really enjoyed.
What?
It felt important in ways I really enjoyed.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I just think it's such a cool thing to do. And can you tease it, like any fun Easter eggs or like cameos that are waiting for readers who've read the other two?
I can say that in The Whispering Dark, Colton, if anyone has read it, it's about a deaf girl who accidentally brings a dead boy back to life, just accidental necromancy, as you do. And she later, when she goes to college, she ends up being her TA in school. And it's a very new age school where they teach their students to slip between the worlds, and she's there on scholarship. She wasn't her aspiration, so she's sort of this fish out of water scenario. And he, meanwhile, has been waiting for her to get there for a while. He knows that she's deaf, and so before she gets there, has learned, and as she comes into school, has started to learn sign language so that he can speak to her. It is never said where he learned sign language because that was cut. Because at the time, nobody knew who Thomas Welsh was.
Oh my gosh, it's all coming together.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
So there's a twist. Little
oh my gosh, we got the insider information. That makes me so happy to know that.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, this is making me want to write a bunch of interconnected standalones.
It was fun to sort of piece them together and have this through arc that, but not necessarily have to have it build.
Yes. Yeah, because that's what I find to be both rewarding and challenging about sequels.
Yeah.
That you have to, you fucked around, now you have to find out.
I did want to ask you about that because you wrote a duology, and that the process is so intimidating to me because it is so different than an interconnected standalone. You're bound to the rules of the world in standalones or the interconnected stories, but not necessarily as intensely as you are in doing a sequel.
Yeah. So I am currently working on the sequel to my third duology, so I don't learn my lesson. I think of most, every series has a different feel to me. I've never written a trilogy or a quartet, I've only ever written duologies. And so I feel in my head, duologies fall under two umbrella categories. One is kind of a repeat of the same structure, and one is an inversion of the same structure. Both are very satisfying and fun to read, and hard to write. So I feel usually writing a sequel is about it's about what overall image am I building to? What am I actually really trying to say here? Because a two-pronged character arc like that, you can really only, you either have to commit to getting you either change your main character slightly, which I did in The Devouring Grey and The Deck of Elements. There were people who had more stuff to say, and I was oh, you really need the microphone before we can let go here. It's actually really important. Versus in Villains, it's the same POV characters in both books, but they have so much more to do because they're not done with their main quest. They have to finish the story.
Yeah, carries over.
Yeah. And so I think what the hardest part is usually making sure that there's enough plot that feels evenly spaced, and it's not there's a third of the book where there's just so much stuff, and then the other 2/3 there's nothing, or vice versa. The pacing is difficult, and then the other thing that's hard is making the character arcs feel satisfying.
Right.
Because, like I said, you're taking someone down such a big journey in one book, and then to take them down another journey in another book, you don't want to feel you're undoing hard work. You want to feel you're building, but you also don't want it to feel the first book didn't really mean anything.
I mean, to kind of lose, you don't want the sails to lose wind as you go. You
Exactly.
keep it kind of going.
Yeah, and it can also be hard on a romance because if characters get together in the first book of a series, it's a lot more difficult sometimes to figure out what to do with them in the sequel.
Yes.
And I'm always trying to be like, that's why I enjoy a slow burn romance, so I don't have to deal with it, but
Yeah.
I have unfortunately had to deal with it of late.
I do, since you brought up All of Us Villains, I do want to talk about sort of both of us have written characters that are hard, objectively difficult to like and root for. And, they're villains, they're doing villainous things.
The terrible children, yes.
Yes. And do you find it challenging to draft a character? I know I had to walk it felt like a high wire act with Vivian.
Oh, I mean, it's hard if it's a girl. If
Yes.
it's a boy, they don't care, they can do
They
anything.
can do anything they want.
People
right?
love the boys and villains, and they hate the girls.
I did find,
I mean, not everyone. A lot of the readers love the girls, but
Yes,
I've noticed
it's hard.
consistently that, like, if you literally stack up who did exactly what acts of, like, violence and betrayal, a woman who does the same things gets,
Yes.
like, doubly, triply punished for
Then
it.
she's not likable, right?
Yes.
I do find, I wrote Your Blood, My Bones, and in it, Peter, the male main character, is actively trying to kill the female protagonist. And that was fine. Like, all right, that's good, we get it, he's trying to escape. And I wrote him that way, I want him to be relatable. But I had so much more feedback with Vivian, who's essentially trying to do the same thing. She's trying to find agency in the same way that Peter is. But it was so much more of a high wire act trying to make her likable while still asserting herself.
Yeah, and I mean, that was actually one of the things I really loved about Vivian. It felt like she really delved into the impossibility of, like, being raised and socialized as, like, a teenage girl and being like, there's no way for me to exist in the world without some form of violence. Like, if the world is going to do violence to me, I will exact violence upon the world. I think, I feel like that is so earned, just so justified, especially for her, but I think for a lot of people. So yeah, I guess, like, the answer is if you're gonna write villains, be prepared for the double standard to really come get you.
Yeah, oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I've learned that this time around, absolutely.
But I wouldn't do it any other way. Yeah. Okay, I also wanted to ask, because we were talking about all your other books, and you have so many main characters between these 3 books, which ones were your favorite or your least favorite to write? Like, who came to you the most quickly? Who was the most rewarding? Who was the most challenging? You don't have to answer most challenging if you don't want to.
It's most challenging. I think the most challenging was definitely Peter, because he is plotting unapologetically to do such a terrible thing, and I need to making readers understand why, not necessarily root for him, but understand where he was coming from was a challenge.
That makes a lot of sense. In villains, they're just like, oh, we are in an ancestral death tournament, so
yes.
Everyone said we had to.
Right, exactly. And I feel like it works, in a tournament, you can, in Hunger Games, or in All of His Villains, or
yes.
it works in that setting. You're like, no, I get that. It's part of the world building. But when you put a boy and a girl alone in a house together, in Maine, they're not in a fantasy world. You're like, no, we don't kill people. Like,
yeah, it gets a lot more difficult, and that's this isn't in my question list, but that's the other issue with a contemporary fantasy or contemporary horror, something that takes place in the real world, but with, like, supernatural stakes. How do you walk the line, right? Of like, what's real and what's not, when you have to work with the laws of morality that, like, right. we understand, but they're heightened by problems we don't actually have, as far as I'm aware. If there are any dead people in the audience, I am sorry.
It definitely was a different set of rules than I think I would have had to follow if I was writing in a second world fantasy. And that was an interesting line to tread, and it took a lot of wrong turns before I got it to a place where, his character felt authentic to me, and I felt like, okay, he's doing what he needs to do, and this is I feel how anyone would respond in this situation. People will be able to see themselves in him in spite of the fact that he's doing something heinous. However, my favorite characters are, and without spoilers, both Colton Price and Vivian Farrow, and I think
I'm not surprised.
I think that is the fact that they both fall under the same umbrella for me is not accidental, and they have some similarities, and I think they were the most fun to play with due to those similarities.
It makes a lot of sense, and I just love a prickly, spiky character.
Yes.
A hedgehog character. Okay, we are getting close to audience questions, but before we do that, I have to make you answer, because you're always talking about Dunkin' online, and we are in Boston.
Yes.
What are Vivian and Tommy's Dunkin' orders?
This is obviously the most important question that you've asked this evening, and
I know.
I feel like I'm gonna just betray. I am a Dunkin's loyalist, but I don't feel like either of them would drink Dunkin's. I think that
I had a feeling you might say something like this.
Yes.
And I feel so sad right now.
No, I know. I am absolutely all for Dunkin's, and I think that there are other characters I've written who would be, but I think Vivian would be a cute, chic, Instagrammable coffee shop girl.
Like one of those matcha lattes that has like a little heart.
Yeah.
But she's like poked holes in it.
Yeah, exactly. Something that she can take a picture of and like post online and with a little caption. That would be her whole shtick. However, I feel like Thomas would be a Cumberland Farms coffee, down it, bolt it, and go.
Okay, that's fair. That's loud. I permit this thing about your characters that you made up.
Thank you.
Wait, but what about your other ones? Because you said some of them would be into Dunkin'.
I think that the Dunkin's drinker would definitely be Wyatt, and she would absolutely be a seasonal, the seasonal sweetest thing you could get. That would be her, for sure.
That's so beautiful to hear. It's like a horoscope, but for New England characters.
It is. It is. What's your Dunkin's order? And you can tell so much about a person from that.
I agree. Okay. And then let's see. Will you talk about some other books that you have recently read that you've enjoyed? Or maybe books that, if people like your books, they would like?
Ooh, okay. So this one is not out yet, but I have to shout it out because it left me, stunned for days. D. Elizabeth has written a book, This Raging Sea, that is out in the fall, and it is a book about these childhood best friends who have been attached at the hip, are getting ready to leave for college, and one morning she wakes up and nobody remembers who he is, and he has been wiped from the subconscious of everyone around her, except for her. She remembers, and so she goes looking for him and tries to figure out where he's gone, and it is bone-chilling and had me throwing my Kindle across the room at the ending, and I think it's one that's going to be
I've been really interested to read this book.
Yeah.
It sounds so good.
It was haunting. So it's one of those ones that pops into my head every now and again, and I'm like, she really did that with the ending there. So
I see an ending. You love to see it.
I love to see a good ending.
Great. Okay. And then my original draft of this was, can you tell us anything about your next project? And you can, because you just got to announce.
Yes, I know that happened all of a sudden on Tuesday. So I got to announce I'm going to have to pick your brain because I am writing a duology.
I did see that, and I was like, interesting.
Yes.
When we started talking about
it will be a
series.
journey. But it is a supernatural romance with horror and dystopian elements, and it follows Shay Parker, who is a deaf girl living in post-climate collapse New England, who offers up her blood to the young leader of a vampire cartel in exchange for much-needed medical supplies. And when her dirty little secret gets out, she ends up being sort of forced out of town and ends up going on the run to find one of her friends who has gone missing.
Sounds so good. It kind of reminds me also, I don't know if you've ever read the Holly Black book, The Coldest Girl in Cold Town, which is another modern vampire kind of dystopic book. Yeah,
yep.
I love vampires. I am so here for this.
I am very excited to be writing this one. I wanted to do vampires for a while, and this is my foray into it. So
I think everybody has a vampire book in them somewhere.
I think so. I think it's it's a mandatory part of the process, I think.
Absolutely. Okay, we got time for one more question before we get audience questions. So I ask this every time I do an event with an author, and I'll do it until they tell me to stop. I think that every book that an author writes teaches us something. And so what do you think you learned from writing I Am Made of Death, and what will you take from it into future projects?
Oh, I think that I learned to be kinder to myself in the writing process.
I love that.
I do, because I beat myself up every single time thinking I'm not doing this right, or I'm not approaching this the right way, or I'm making this harder for myself. And I think I've come to learn that that's just my process, is, kind of making mistakes and learning from them until I have a book.
I think that's how everyone writes a book. But it's really easy to feel like everyone else is doing a better job than you, or
Yes.
moving faster than you, or like has it all worked out to a science. But you can only really learn how to write the book you're writing, and then you have to go write a different one as soon as you learn how.
Right, and then you blow it all up again.
Yep.
It's all new. It's not all new for the newest another time rather. Yeah, so that's my takeaway.
I love that.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, it's been so wonderful to ask you all my questions.
Thank you.
So I guess another round of applause for you before we take it to the audience. Okay, and then do any of you have questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
I love how you mentioned Mary Kate and Ashley for inspiration as part of this book. Would you have any other movies or media TV shows that relate to Your Blood, My Bones or The Whispering Dark in that kind of way?
Oh, in The Whispering Dark, I like to say that it's, oh my God, it's Rory and Logan, but horror.
Okay.
From Gilmore Girls. And for Your Blood, My Bones, when I first pitched it, I pitched it as The Breakfast Club, but horror.
Amazing.
So just, instead of detention, they're trapped in a farmhouse. Instead of a principal, it's a demon in the woods, very similar. So, yeah, I love that question, thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. Does anyone else have any questions? If you don't, I'll keep asking Kelly questions. Oh, amazing.
Can you sign, or would you prefer somebody to speak? Okay. So I'm thrilled that you're including deaf characters in fiction books because there's not many with deaf characters in it that are using sign language, so I want to say that's incredible. Are there any books with deaf characters that inspired you to write, or what inspired you to include deaf characters?
So thank you, that's a good question. I initially was writing books with hearing characters because when I was in college, I wrote a short story for a creative writing class, and it had a deaf character in it. It was sort of a early conceptual version of The Whispering Dark, just in a short story for school. And my professor told me that it was good writing, but that I should consider not putting a deaf character into the book because it would alienate able-bodied readers. And that really made me mad. And so I wanted to, I had never seen deaf characters in books growing up, and I consumed a lot of books. I lost my hearing when I was 4 and read a lot after that, and so I didn't see why I shouldn't put someone who perceived the world the way I did into a book. But honestly, I was young, so I took that to heart and tried, for a while to write hearing characters, and then I read Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo, and Kat Brecker uses a cane, and I was like, nobody feels alienated from this book because of that, so what am I doing? Why have I spent so much time believing this professor? And I wrote The Whispering Dark, and Lane has the same hearing loss as I do, so that's sort of what brought me to it.
Oh, that's cool, that's awesome, thank you.
Great, okay. Also love that. Kaz, I think, was like a big inspiration for a lot of writers to be like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
If someone can be that beloved and also be like authentic about their disability, then
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Absolutely, and it really stuck out to me. It made me kind of revisit all these things that I had sort of boxed away because of that professor's advice. Bad advice, but
But probably pretty common, unfortunately.
Right, yeah, when you're young, you just, this is an older person who's been doing it longer,
Yeah.
who's giving you, well-intentioned advice.
I definitely got some of that in college. One of which was, don't write children's books. You're a sellout if you do. I was like, you have no idea what you're talking about.
No, and here you are.
Here I am. All right. Do we have any more questions?
I have another one.
Yes, absolutely.
So obviously a theme in a lot of your books is the characters are kind of between, like they have a foot in both spaces. There's a supernatural element where they're obviously like in another parallel universe of where the theme is death of some sort in all of them. First of all, it's very fascinating the way you've been able to keep that theme in all 3 books in different ways. But I would love to know just more of about that theme in these books, where it comes from, inspiration, or what that means to you.
I have always been a very morbid child. When I was 4, I had sick with meningitis, and I was in a coma for a week. And it was, it was a very kind of rough time for my family, and obviously, impacted all of us. And I think from that, I just sort of took a lifelong fixation on near-death experiences, and how that can affect a person and how that could be formative. And because I think I was looking for answers because it was so formative for me that I sought it out in a lot of literature that I read. And I had kind of a Wednesday Addams like approach to it as a little kid, freaking everybody out with all the weird things that I would say. And I just was very drawn to it as a topic. And when I wanted to write horror, because I've been a horror fan my whole life, and I wanted to explore death through a horror lens and also through a healing lens, because I do think that horror is so nice because it's about hope and healing, even when it's grotesque or when it's really scary or when it's really deep. There's this really wonderful message that there's more after the story ends. And for me, I found a lot of comfort in horror because of that, and sort of wanted to explore it in my own stories as well.
Thank you. You
Yeah.
did a beautiful job.
Well, thank you.
Great, I think I saw another question back here.
Okay, this is kind of a selfish question.
Okay.
Because I am going away for spring break next week, and I was excited to bring this book with me, but I haven't read the other 2 books yet. So I'm wondering, can I still enjoy the cameos if I sort of read the series backwards?
I think I wrote them to be enjoyed alone, completely independent of each other. But I do think there's a small plot twist in I Am Made of Death that lands the best if you've already read The Whispering Dark. Yeah.
Very good, non-spoilery answer.
I've been practicing.
All right, I think we have a question over here.
Speaking of things that may or may not have like spoiler elements to them, what is like your personal like favorite or like scene that you might be like the most proud of in I Am Made of Death, like when you were writing it or afterwards?
Okay, I have a 2-part answer to that, only because one of them just aesthetically is my favorite, and one is my favorite because I got to keep it in, and I thought they'd make me take it out. It's like I got away with something. My favorite scene is just stylistically, there is a scene when they're in the cathedral, and later on in the book, they all end up in this spooky old church, and Vivian is sort of unleashing the monster, as it were, and is hunting everyone in the church. And there is this scene I wanted to write. She has 2 Doberman, and I love dogs, but I don't know if you've ever seen a Doberman stalking its prey. It has a very slow, creepy walk that they do, and I really wanted to channel that walk with Vivian, with these sentinel dogs by her side, eyes gleaming in the dark. And it took me so many tries to write it and rewrite it and rewrite it to make it look and have the beats go in my head, that when I finally nailed it, I was like, there, this is it. This is the scene. Like we were talking about, the horse, right? Yep. The first few times it was like a stick figure drawing, and then I finally got it to where it looked like a horse, and I was like, here we go. And
It's so bone chilling. As soon as you started talking, I was like, oh, like the image flared in my mind.
Yeah.
You did a great job.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a real big personal challenge for me because I couldn't get the pacing and the beats to be right for the first few drafts. So it was like my own personal like Everest to get that scene right. And then my other favorite scene, there is a scene where Vivian, I don't think this is too much of a spoiler, where Vivian is desperately trying to get Thomas to quit, and she does some things that are not very nice, and one of them is cutting up all of his suits. So he has nothing to wear besides his gym clothes, and she's hoping that her stepdad will fire him because of that. And that was a nod to Taylor Swift's Blank Space, where she cuts up all the suits in the music video, and it was so blatant that I thought they were gonna be like, Kelly, you can't do this. And they did flag it at one point, and they were like, is this a thing? And I was like, yeah, it's my Taylor Swift Easter egg. And so, but I got to keep it in, so I was very, very proud of myself for getting away with that one.
Sometimes that's like the little victories are what you remember.
Yeah,
That's
right?
I did catch that reference, and I was delighted. I don't think it's a bad thing to be like, oh, look at this thing that we referenced.
Yeah, I was snuck it in there for any Swifties who are reading who are gonna be like, wait a minute, I've seen this in a music video, and that's my moment.
Great, all right. Do we have any more questions? Yes.
I hear a lot of authors talk about how they refill their creative well. What does that process look like for the both of you, and is it something that you actively do with thought and enjoy giving yourself time off?
I like this question, and I'm curious to know what your answer is, because I feel like we both write very dark books and heavy
Yes.
books. So I want to know what you do.
Oh boy. I definitely, if I get like deep enough in like the hole, I start to like become my characters a little bit. Like I start to feel like I'm living their lives, and their lives are unpleasant because I have made them so. And I'm like, especially with the book I have coming out in the fall, A Fate So Cold, that was like really brutal book to write, and it took me and my co-author 3 years to write it. And so for 3 years, we both at one point we were both like, I feel like we have become these very traumatized teenagers, and it was a lot. But also, I mean, the cure to that is thankfully that like those people aren't real, and that's not my life. So taking a break. Usually taking a break and then like immersing myself in some form of content that I'm obsessed with, so I can fill like the same hole in my brain that usually like the book I'm working on fills. So like playing a really good video game, or like watching excellent TV, or reading a bunch of good books. That's what I always try to do. I try to stack content so that when I'm not on deadline, I just like consume.
Yes.
I am a vessel.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I'm the same. Like I feel like consuming content, because I do love to read and watch movies and TV and all that, and all my comfort shows. I will rewatch Buffy reruns and Teen Wolf reruns endlessly, just because they're things that I've seen so many times, and it's for me it's I know the shows are high stakes, but for me it's low stakes because I have them all memorized.
I understand. We can talk about Buffy later. I want to know all your Buffy hot takes.
Yes, I have many Buffy hot takes.
Me too. Yeah, and so do you feel like you need to like wait for more challenging media when you are taking a break, when you're refilling your well?
I'm actually, this is so embarrassing to admit, because people will ask me what I think about like Severance, or what I think about new shows, and I haven't watched a new show because I just can't intake anything, especially when I'm writing something heavy. I just need to watch something I've seen a million times. It's just...
No, it makes so much sense to me. You're like, this is what I'm letting through the barrier. Everyone only has so much like room in their minds for stuff, and for most people who consume content, they're not also like making a book. It's a delicate process. It's like you're baking it in the oven. You have to keep like doing all these things, taking it out, putting it back in.
Absolutely.
It's your business and no one else's. Unless you wrote it with someone else, then you're sharing an oven.
Right, exactly. So it's just comfort shows all the way. And then I like to read a lot of like really sappy, sweet, low stakes romance, not horror at all.
Oh, that's really interesting. What's one of your favorite sappy, low stakes romances that you've recently read? Asking for a friend, it's me.
I love Emily Henry. I don't
Oh my
know
God,
if
I
that's low
love
stakes,
Emily Henry's books.
but
They're not low stakes, they're like emotionally devastating.
I
They make me cry.
just mean no one's trying to kill anyone. There's nobody.
Okay, fair.
There's no, it's not like all of us villains are all going after each other. But
Yeah, that's fair. I love Emily Henry. I read all her books as
same.
soon as they come out, usually in the middle of the night.
yes, it's so nice. I'll be up reading it late when I'm trying to just refill the creative well without intaking anything too scary.
Yeah, that was a great
That
question.
is a great question. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have time for like one or two more if anybody has been a little shy but is still curious. But if not, I can keep asking you questions. Oh, amazing.
I'm curious, you mentioned you like horror. What are some of your favorite movies, and do you draw any inspiration from them?
Oh, that's a good one. So I am a big Stephen King fan. And I do draw inspiration. I like writing my books in New England. I think he is, such a prevalent New England Gothic horror writer. And I aspire to be similar to him in the way that I love the found family aspects, or the close-knit aspects of it, which is one of my favorite horror movies. I saw it when I was a kid, probably too young to have seen it. And it really stuck with me. And so I think I'm always chasing the high of some of his movies and books that I've read, even as a writer. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Okay, I think we have two more.
Oh, I have a silly question. Why did you pick bows? Like ribbons on the front?
Ooh, that is a good question. I wanted Vivian to be hyper feminine and pink, and she is someone who looks in the mirror and sees a creature in the mirror, and which I wanted it to be very representative of body dysmorphia, and this idea that you're not seeing what everybody else is seeing. And I thought the best way to do that was to give her this show how much effort she's making to just dress herself up, but when she looks in the mirror, she still doesn't see herself as she is. She sees herself as this monster, which I think you know, as a teen, like I can remember feeling that way. And so I just really wanted to sort of make this contrast between Vivian as everyone else sees her and Vivian as she sees herself.
What Taylor Swift songs would each main character be?
This is good. This will be
I
our
want to
final
pretend that I don't have an answer for this.
I don't, who do you think
I've
you're
been waiting all
fooling?
night. No, I'm kidding. I don't know if I have one for each character, but I have one for each book. And for this book, it would be The Bolter from her most recent album. I feel like it really captures Vivian to a T. And then for Your Blood, My Bones, it would be Peter, which I feel like she'd read my book, obviously. I know this isn't about Peter Pan, this is about my Peter. And then for The Whispering Dark, it would be Treacherous. Or, it's Treacherous, that's the one. So.
Amazing. Very informative also. That's like the quick and dirty guide to
Quick and dirty.
books.
I could go on, I could do a dissertation, but we don't have all night.
Okay.
Thank you both so much. Give them a round of applause.
We have books for sale.
Now it's on. We have books for sale at the back of the event space, so please grab. We have multiple copies of both of these authors' books, so grab that. And Kelly will be signing. We'll start the signing line on the opposite side of the table and kind of wrap it down to the back of the event space. Thank you again so much for being here.
Yeah.